Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's episode of Shop Talk. Before we get started, one quick promo. Data Architecture Day, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group, is going to be on Saturday, May 16th. We will have an all-day marathon on Twitch. All day means basically however many sessions we have, and when I need to take a nap. But you can learn more. You can sign up at meetup.com/trypass. The call for speakers is still open, will be open until Wednesday, and then we'll make some decisions on who will speak. We'll figure out the schedule, and then the meetup will have that schedule posted. So with that, I'd say sign up for Data Architecture Day. Now, let's see the panel. So tonight, we have with us our cast of characters. Directly to my right, probably your left, Mala Mahadevan. Hi, Mala.
Hi,
How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Excellent. And to our south, which may be your east, is Tom Norman. How are you, Tom?
Well, I'm doing good, and that all depends upon how your screen is, because I'm actually due to your left on my screen. So
it's all subjective.
It's all subjective. So doing well tonight.
Excellent. So the way Shop Talk works is we're going to go from now until 8 p.m. and basically take user questions. So if you have any questions at all around SQL Server, around the data platform, drop them in chat. We'll take those on sort of a priority queue, where the priority is how interesting it is. And if there are no questions, then we'll handle a few topics. We'll have some topics of interest. I'll try to throw a couple pipe bombs, relatively speaking, into the discussion. That's generally how we roll. So if you have any questions at all, drop them in chat. I want to hear about them. In the meantime, we were having a little bit of a discussion before the show began on upgrading, because my team is upgraded to SQL Server 2019. Our production move was today. So far, it's been okay. Nothing has fallen over yet. I'm sure that as I say that, the server's going to fail like right in the middle of Shop Talk, but that's what I'll get for jinxing myself. So one of the big questions, actually two of the big questions. Number one is, when do you upgrade? Number two is, why do you upgrade? And let's take those one at a time, because we have some different opinions on here. So I think should be a reasonable discussion. And if anybody in chat wants to share their opinions as well, love to hear them as well. So Mala, you were talking about, you actually brought up this question, and you mentioned your philosophy on upgrades.
My philosophy, when I used to be a production DBA, which has been about 2 years now, I think maybe more, I think 3 years now, or even more than that, used to be to wait for service pack 1 for the product to be stable, A. B, depending on the roadmap the company wants to follow, which means we did skip versions. We didn't upgrade every new version that came out unless there was a compelling business reason or a feature we wanted to use. We went with every other version, and we waited until Service Pack 1. That was kind of the general plan. At most places, it was a combo of the technical roadmap and Service Pack 1. But Service Pack 1 was kind of a big deal. It meant that the product had stabilized somewhat. It wasn't always the case, but it was some sort of an indicator that it was.
Okay.
Now that that's gone, I'm kind of wondering, I really don't know how I would make that decision personally. I'm not sure if there are any hard and fast rules to go by.
All right. So Tom, as the only actual DBA on this chat, what's your thought on this?
Well, it's interesting because I've always been one that's been kind of, I push the envelope In fact, the last company I worked for, I left because I could see them staying on 2008 R2, and I think they still are there. But it's interesting now because things are a little bit different with the service pack and CU issue, and that is because a lot of these features are already out in Azure SQL database
Mm-hmm.
for a while before it even gets to the platform, to the on-premises version of the software.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm still kind of like you, Mila, though, is that we don't hit every version. For example, we're still on SQL Server 2016 in production, and our next version that we're
Mm-hmm.
targeting is going to be 2019. We're going to just hop right
Mm-hmm.
over 2017 and not upgrade to,
Right.
to, to 2017. But I'm with you to the fact of what compelling item is in a version or items that are in a version that will get me to basically want to go ahead and get that upgrade in place. If I have a compelling feature, I very well may upgrade that thing and not skip the version.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but there's a couple things in 2019 that is going to be huge for our shop, as we were talking before. Is I've got one product that we had some developers, and sad to say, most of the database code that I get to work with has been built by developers. Um, is that they try to use functions as object-oriented programs.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really need the fix in 2019 to the functions.
Right.
Uh, but then the other part of it is I'm one of the few people that I know that have, that's even put in always encrypted, and it would be nice to have the additional functionality of always encrypted and have the enclave.
Mm-hmm.
But that is like, looking at how to install it, I'm thinking about installing it on my laptop, maybe as a VM or something, but it looks awful complex and possibly awful expensive because you have to have various layers in there to do it with. So
Right.
still jury's out whether I get Enclave into production or not, but definitely going to give it a shot if possible.
Yeah, and I have a bit of a different opinion. Part of it is that I'm not really a DBA anymore, and that is I I like upgrades. I like moving to new versions. I like new things, shiny things. I like having say there are these new features. Microsoft says here's a pre-release version of SQL Server 20, I don't know, 2021, let's say. I'll say yes, I will happily install that pre-release version. And that's kind of the way that I go because yeah, I do enjoy the new things. I like working for companies that will push the edge in that regard. Um I do understand the need for stability, in spite of myself. I definitely need to understand the need for stability, but I would happily take upgrades and bugs versus stability on something that's so old that it's got its own problems. I mean, you're gonna have a problem set regardless. Like you've got the
Mm-hmm.
companies that are running SQL Server 2005, 2008, even
Mm-hmm.
2008 R2,
Mm-hmm.
and they have their own problems. Their problems are
Right.
basically, yeah, I can't tune this query because all of the nice things that have been introduced in the last decade of SQL Server I don't get.
Right.
Um,
Correct.
Now, as far
Well,
as service packs go, I've never liked the argument about SP1. Um, I think it probably came from the exchange world, if I remember right. That's where they were saying wait until SP1. But um, I don't know. It didn't seem like SP1 necessarily made for a more stable product. Although
Mm-hmm.
with SQL Server 2017 and 2019, especially 2019, some of those CUs I see release a lot of new bugs. CU3, for example, was this huge list of bug fixes, and I found at least 2 new bugs in Polybase that hadn't been fixed as of CU4. Maybe they'll be fixed for CU5. Hopefully they will. But other people who are trying other parts of this software are running into other issues around it. So maybe there is some sense in waiting.
That's why I always love to set on a CU for at least a month to let all you guys find everything and then figure out whether I want to go or not. So
also, that to me, for an upgrade is all the more reason that your lower environment should reflect production as closely as possible.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
a good
Yeah.
point, Mala.
Yeah.
That is the way that we develop and work with everything.
Right.
Is because of the way we develop and do everything with SQL Server data tools. All of our definition of the SQL Server is actually within SQL Server data tools. So when I install that locally on a developer's box, he's not only got encryption, he's got max DOP set the same way. He's got everything set the exact same way as production, so that, and he actually has an obfuscated version of production. So he's got the selectivity, he's got everything that production's got. So it's kind of like, okay, the data is not quite in the order. The names have been changed to protect the innocent, but the thing of it is you still have the same data, just changed up a little bit. So it's really interesting because like I said, I will push the envelope, but I won't go there that far. And Kevin, 2 years ago, before we got everything up to 2016, we were running a SQL Server 2000 box. So I had to hop through, to get it to 16, I had to do a hop through 2008 to get it there. So it was nice to finally get upgraded, but it's interesting that Dell, and I think Dell Quest still has a chart somewhere that shows you who's running what, and stuff. And I haven't seen it in a while, but that was really interesting when I saw it.
Yeah, that back in the 2016, no, it was 2017 days, when 2017 had just been released, something like more than half of companies using their software were still on 2008 R2 or early.
Yeah.
And 2008 R2 is the special version because that's when they changed licensing after that. So with 2012, they went to the core-based licensing. You have a lot of companies that just said, we're not going to pay that extra money for SQL Server licensing. And that
correct. Yeah.
permanently derailed regular upgrades for a fair number of companies. Admittedly, those are not companies I would work for because of that reason. Like, okay, if it's a good business decision not to invest in your database backend, that's fair. If you've made that cost-benefit analysis, that's fair. It's not a shop I want to be at. If it's not a good business decision and you're just making a bad business decision, probably not a shop I want to be at.
Well, a lot of shops also went the vendor way. Went with vendor products, you really like quite a lot of people I worked with are now supporting a handful of products that are all vendor based, and you just have to support whatever the vendor is willing to run it on.
That's an exception. Yeah, that I can buy. Like, okay, we're gonna take this thing only runs on SQL Server 2005. Fine, you put it in a VM, you stick it in its own little subnet, you make sure nothing else touches it except for the one web app that needs it, and say, well, we can't do anything with that.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I get that. For vendors, you just have to deal with them being silly sometimes.
Well, the other part that gets you, Kevin, is if your company is into buying other companies' acquisitions and you stumble into stuff. And we just, within the last couple of years, actually the last 4 or 5 years, we've been buying a lot of companies. We bought one a couple of years ago that basically they were on 2008 R2 in an IBM colo. Well, we were having trouble getting it out of the colo. Just IBM wasn't helping us at all. And we finally got it out a couple of weeks ago, well, actually about a month ago, and put it into Azure. But we, it was in 2008 R2. We put it in 2017, but we, because of the application, and I literally had some DTS packages. I was on Twitter begging people saying, hey, do you have, the DTS compatibility pack? Do you have this particular EXE? Because
Right.
I was like going, I don't have it anymore. So I'm in our software folder, I'm putting that stuff back because I'm like going, if we buy more companies, no telling what I'm gonna run into.
Yeah. Yeah. So okay, that's also fair. Mr. Ferrata says burn all of the images. Yeah, save all your stuff. Save all your stuff.
Yeah, I agree with him. Save your images and save your, because the funny thing about it, Kevin, is you can go out there and find SQL Server 2000 out there. You can actually find it. You can install it. You can find the service packs as you can install those also. What you can't find is, remember the feature packs that they had? They didn't put those out there anywhere for you, and that's what you
Uh-oh.
needed. You needed the feature packs,
Yeah.
the accessory stuff that you would
Interesting.
throw on top. Yeah.
Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. I never thought of that, Tom. That's yeah.
Well, and that wasn't but 2 months ago that I found SQL Server 2000. We spun up a box, 2003 software OS box, and we threw SQL Server 2000 to try to upgrade those DTS packages.
Ah,
So you never know what you're going to run into. You might buy a company that you have to upgrade. So
yeah, yeah, and the exception to what I'm saying is that if it's a company where it's like, okay, we have a plan to get up to SQL Server 2019. And we're on 2008 R2. We have a plan. It's established. We have a go live date. All right, that's fair. Or hiring a person, your job is to get this upgraded. That gets a little iffy because, all right, well, who's going to fight against that is the problem.
Well, the big deal is to have a upper management team, a management team or upper management, direct report or higher, a little bit higher, that believes in trying to stay current. Now what does that mean? Does that mean that
Right. Very true. That's true. Yeah.
I'm on 2016? Well, that's, it's 2020. We're not totally current, but we're only, because of 2019 was just recently, well, not too recently, but basically we're only 2 releases behind. And if we upgrade this year, then we basically are back up to current. So
Yeah, yeah. 2016 is recent enough. There's a
yeah,
lot of nice stuff that came out in 2017 and also in 2019, but 16 is good.
Yeah.
Way
yeah,
better than 8R2.
yeah. Yeah, like I said, I am pushing. I'm hoping that we'll be on 2019 this year. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. All right, we have some comments in chat around this. So Mike starts us out. Can we get some pro comments from SQL Server people about SQL interfaces that show up but aren't SQL proper? Okay.
What was that?
So the idea here is that in different data platform technologies, there's SQL, but it's all different. And the way that I would explain this, and Mike's point is, SQL doesn't seem like a standard because you have the Microsoft version, the IBM version, the Oracle version, and going further on with that, you get into other subgenres of it that he didn't point out, like KSQL for Confluence, Kafka. You have Spark SQL. You have Hive. You have Impala. You have dozens of different dialects of SQL. And so the question becomes, what's up with that? How what is the deal with this? What's the deal with SQL? And
Well, the real question would be there, is the product that you're working with ANSI compliant, right?
right.
And then the real question is, does your development staff understand the ANSI compliant so that when you're coding everything, you're coding it totally ANSI compliant to go to wherever you want to go?
Right.
Or
Yep.
or we
So
go or we go to Kevin's Polybase and just write it all in T-SQL, right?
exactly. So the responses to Tom: no, no, and yes. Okay.
Yeah.
First, ANSI. ANSI has a standard for SQL. They have a set of standards. There was a standard. I know the 89 standard. There was an 83 standard, if I remember right. You have standards, I think, that go back into the late 70s. You have 92. There was a 97. There's a 2000, a 2003. Basically, every few years, they come out with new versions of their standard, and that introduces new syntax. It introduces new behavior. Sometimes it takes away behavior. So there's the old ANSI 89 syntax for an outer join, where you could use like star equal, and that tells you that it's a left outer join.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I hate that. I hate that.
There's also the comma table comma, which they use for graph tables now.
Yeah, that's true. Yep, and the comma separated list of tables to indicate joins, which is similar to what Mala just mentioned. But yeah, I hate that.
Oh,
Because,
yeah,
by the way,
me
if you
too.
mess that up, you accidentally get a Cartesian product.
Right.
Whereas if you
Well,
use ANSI 92 inner join, you will never get a Cartesian product. You will get an error.
Right.
but don't you also have the same problem? In fact, the way that, I hear the developers talk, don't we have the same exact problem in Java versus Entity Framework versus Dapper versus in Hibernate versus whatever? We've got the same, this mishmash of coding standards and stuff that you've got to go through, right?
A little bit. So back on the ANSI bit after I derailed myself. Pretty good at that. So you have this standard, but the thing is, nobody follows the standard.
That's what I was coming to.
Yeah, nobody truly follows it.
We have every shop I worked at has their T-SQL coding standards, which whatever works for them. Nobody really goes to great extents to see how ANSI compliant those standards are or any such thing.
Well, even within the database products, SQL
Right.
Server is not ANSI compliant. Oracle is not. Postgres is not.
No.
DB2 is not. Nobody
Right.
is fully ANSI compliant and solely ANSI compliant. So
Right.
the ANSI standard is the generally accepted norm to which everybody tries to subscribe as much as possible. And the ANSI standard includes a lot of stuff, and they've introduced quite a few interesting things over time. Like common table expressions were added, I think, in SQL 2000. It was 97 or 2000. And it took a while before Oracle and SQL Server brought them into their products.
Right.
There are other data platform technologies that are SQL based that it took even longer. Spark, for example, Spark SQL didn't support common table expressions until just a couple years ago. So it's a matter of implementation. That this is a large surface area that development teams are going to implement based on consumer need. And then they will add things on top of that. There are really useful things that are T-SQL only. Cross apply, outer apply is a really good example of that. The apply operator is not part of the SQL standard. Now, in the SQL standard, there was later on something is called, if I remember right, it's a lateral join. which is the equivalent of apply. It's just Microsoft came out with apply before this lateral join was part of the standard. And since they were a first mover, they named it the way that made sense to them. Actually, I think it makes a lot of sense in terms of naming, but ended up not being the standard. So apply in T-SQL is only for T-SQL. And a company that says you can't use anything that's not truly ANSI compliant, I think they're losing out on a lot. I understand, like, if you have a product that needs to run on 12 different data platform technologies, you deal with it. But if, for example, your shop is SQL Server, you only run SQL Server, not taking advantage of everything available in SQL Server is not a great idea, because you'll lose out on a lot of stuff with the idea that, oh, well, I'll be able to port this over to Oracle later. Well, what's the real probability that you're switching to Oracle? It might not be 0. It might be greater than 0. But if you're like a 95 or 100% SQL Server shop, you're probably not switching anytime soon.
Well, it's interesting that we actually run a third-party product that is not a SQL Server backend product. They'd never built it for SQL Server. And some of the tuning that's needed to be done on it and stuff, I will find the issues and I will send it to their development team and say, if you will just do this, you'll make your product so much faster. In fact, Kevin, it was one of my blog posts where they were doing a implicit conversion, but they were doing it literally, thousands of times a minute. And I had them change it, and we went from like 25 CPUs back down to 8. So I agree with you. When you're trying to make your product multi-platform, sometimes what you're doing is you're introducing issues of performance and stuff that one product's not going to handle it as well as the other product does.
Yep. And for a small scale system where, hey, biggest table's only a couple 100,000 rows, not a big deal. But if you are looking at a large platform, that can be the difference between good performance and crummy performance.
And that's what it was. It was definitely crummy performance till they fixed it.
Right. And it may perform perfectly well in Postgres and Oracle, but just not over here. Because different optimizers, different, like they're using the same core language mostly, but underneath there's a lot that's different.
Right.
It would almost be like saying, okay, I'm going to take the engine out of my natural gas car and put it into your Miata, and it's going to run as fast as it does currently today, Kevin. You would like going, get that thing out of there.
That is true. Okay, so how does SQL change for the new things Microsoft adds to SQL Server? And the answer to that is that, well, there are two different ways. Number one is something that's in the ANSI syntax that is implemented. Usually Microsoft will implement it mostly to completely according to the standard. Temporal tables are an example where they did it mostly. Common table expressions, pretty much completely. There are some things where, like with temporal tables, there are pieces that were not included, but Microsoft didn't really add anything on top of what is included in the standard. In other places, they'll add on top of the standard and say, well, the standard's okay, but we're going to add these additional attributes or pieces of syntax that will make life easier for developers that weren't included in the standard because of whatever reason. And the other side is where it's strictly Microsoft, like something like Polybase. They'll use the similar syntax, you'll use similar naming, the similar structural concepts so that it feels fairly smooth, but it'll be specific to something only in SQL Server. So Polybase, great example for this, because we have an idea, external data source. That is, I'm going to point to somewhere out in the world that is not my server.
Mm-hmm.
The syntax for it, if you read the external data source syntax, it looks pretty similar to what you would expect given what I've explained.
Mm.
And they try to do that. I know that they try to be very explicit about the syntax utilization and trying not to overload the same term too many times, although sometimes they do.
Mm.
Any other thoughts on that?
Nope, I don't have any
Nope.
more.
Try not
I think you
to.
covered everything, Kevin.
And I'm trying not to rant too much, but
It was super interesting, by the way. To me.
okay. So John Fan follows up that SQL syntax is different across platforms. Like T-SQL is not used in Oracle and MySQL, which is true. So T-SQL is the Sybase variant of SQL, Transact SQL, that is common in Sybase and in Microsoft SQL Server. There are variants of it that are used in Access. And by the way, Sybase and SQL Server split far enough ago that the syntax is not really the same anymore.
Right.
They both call it T-SQL. They're both kind of really close to each other, but there are quite a few differences. And with Oracle, actually, there's PLSQL, Procedural Language SQL. Well, Postgres was a spin-off of Oracle. It was a bunch of Oracle people who developed for Oracle who wanted their own set of changes. They wanted to go their own direction, and they created Postgres. Postgres uses PLSQL as its core language as well, but they're not exactly the same. They've made a lot of changes over time. MySQL is its own special language, and John Fan was wondering, okay, Oracle and MySQL are both owned by Oracle. Yes. Oracle has, obviously Oracle. They bought MySQL, spent a couple $2 billion for them a while back. And incidentally, this is why MySQL split off into two different platforms as well. Because you have MySQL, which is owned by Oracle, and you have MariaDB, which is the totally open source version that a lot of MySQL developers did not want to work for a product that Oracle owned. And so they forked the code and furthered it as MariaDB.
It's kind of back to what I was saying. You know, you start companies buying companies, and it's like these things get just forked and, you know, and totally changes and all that kind of stuff. But it's almost like the English language, you know, it's like
Right.
if you, depending on what part of the country you're in, the language will also be variant, and especially if you go British English to American English, it's like night and day, you know, the difference, you know, and you probably won't even recognize it unless you've lived there or talked to someone about it and stuff.
Yeah.
And Mala, you should know because you've come from probably more of a British colony, so
Right.
you know we could definitely talk about British words there.
Yeah. I'm from English.
Yes,
So
exactly.
John Fan was asking as a follow-up, what is SQL 92? So that was one of the ANSI implementations. And every few years, they'll create a new implementation that is usually an expansion of what they previously had done. 92 is probably the most famous version because that's where you got like inner join, outer join. There were several additions to that version that were really interesting. But it's changed a lot since then. There have been I think there have been about a half dozen major releases of the SQL standard since 92. Let's see. SQL is more like a domain-specific language than a general-purpose programming language. Yes, Lysanki has it exactly right. SQL is a DSL. It is a domain-specific language. Its domain is data. If you're working with data, SQL is one of the best languages, probably the best language we have for that. This leads to something that I call Fiesel's Law. Fiesel's Law says that as a data platform technology matures, it eventually develops a SQL interface. and everything eventually develops a SQL interface. The MongoDB people tried really hard not to. And there's an open source third-party implementation of a SQL interface for Mongo. Elasticsearch has actually pushed toward a SQL interface. Kafka, like stuff that doesn't even necessarily seem like it would make sense to have a SQL interface at first, end up with SQL interfaces because that's how data analysts want to work with the data. It's why, for example, in the Hadoop world, you had MapReduce, you had the Java code, and Facebook very early on develops Apache Hive, which is SQL for Hadoop. Because their analysts know SQL, they didn't want their analysts to have to spend all their time learning and writing Java code. So let's write something that translates SQL to Java code and then creates those MapReduce jobs for them. So yeah, SQL is a domain-specific language. So Raymond says he's talking about languages, like other languages. C++, for example, is on version 2020. Yeah, other languages certainly change over time too. Like C# 8 is out, C# 9 is under development. F# at version 5, or they're working on version 5. Yeah, so languages they're not stayed. They don't remain completely ossified. Even things like Lisp, still people developing on variants of Common Lisp, and there are standards that move over time as long as you have enough developers.
I kind of wish it would at times slow down because there's so much to learn. And I know that when I first started working with SQL, it was maybe one book of about 500 pages, and now I'd hate to even think, there is just a lot there, and a lot has changed, and a lot's been added to it.
Yeah, in the days of, I think even until 2005, it was pretty common to be asked an interview question like, what are the features of SQL, do you know? There were about 10 or 12 of them, and you said what you knew well, and you didn't know the rest of it that well, but you pretty much had an idea of everything.
Yeah.
Now it is like, nobody even asks that kind of a question anymore.
No, because it's just too broad.
Yeah.
Yep. One of my favorite anecdotes that is kind of tangential to that is the last mathematician who you could argue knew a majority about every branch of mathematics was Gauss. And it's not just because Gauss was a genius. He was a genius. But there has been so much splintering in the mathematics world because of specialization. And so we've delved into so many different fields to the point where a single person can't be an expert on the majority of those fields. That you would need to specialize in that field just to understand what the people are talking about in that field.
That.
So you get to a point to where you have to specialize. You can't be a true generalist and be a master of all things.
Right.
You can be a generalist and be pretty good at a lot of stuff. And that's absolutely reasonable goal to have if you want it to be. But you can't be a generalist who's like an expert on everything.
You mean I can't know polybase, big data clusters, let me see, SSAS, SSRS, the data engine, performance tuning. I can't know encryption. I can't know all that, Kevin?
I mean, I can, but not many people can.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's so much to know, and it's it's interesting to me that as I go to SQL Saturdays or whatever, I like to go to the classes or where I don't know exactly what they're talking about, because if I understand the concept, it's kind of like, for example, like I said, I've been inheriting databases, and we wrote this past year. and we actually finally used the SQL hierarchy field. And I was like going, yay, I finally get to use, something that might work here. And seems to be
Did it?
working so far. Yeah, so
Okay.
far it's working well. So,
Good, good.
but,
I'm glad that
You
hierarchy
really,
ID
you're
worked
using
for somebody.
hierarchy. Pretty old, Tom.
well, I know, but it's
I'm
the,
not a big fan of that thing.
yeah, we're actually using it. It's doing
Hey.
pretty
You didn't
well.
try graph tables?
No, we didn't do any graph tables. We didn't have a need for graph tables yet. So,
Yeah, if hierarchy ID works, great. I haven't found many good uses of it, but
Mm-hmm.
somewhere behind me, I've got a copy of Adam Mechanic's book on expert T-SQL development, where he goes into some detail on trees, if I remember right, and Joe Selko's book on trees.
Oh, that's a
And
great book.
between
That's
the
a great
two
book.
of those,
Yeah.
there are 3 really good designs for trees, depending on how you want to query the data later.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
so it gets really interesting because it's like, well, based on how you need to access this data, one of these 3
Mm-hmm.
trees will be your best bet, but the
Mm-hmm.
other 2 will be very painful for you.
Right.
well, it's interesting, that product I was telling you about that we were converting and we just moved it over to Azure. I
Mm-hmm.
had to use
All
this.
right.
Yeah. Service
I'll
broker.
take hierarchy ID over that.
Yeah. They
Ah,
they actually have service broker running. And I believe it, when it first came out in 2005, this is one of the classes I taught. And I was like
wow.
going, I've never used it. And then I had to go, I was like, oh my word, I need to try to remember how to use service broker.
Yeah,
So
I like Service Broker a lot. Colleen Morrow has a good series on Service Broker. Alan White's got a nice presentation. I've done some cool things with Service Broker. It's
yeah, so
I've never
painful.
used. That's one feature of SQL Server I've never used, and I've always been intimidated by it somewhat. I
Yeah,
sat through Alan's presentation a couple of times. A lot of it went over my head, and I've been really. Maybe if I use it, it won't be that bad.
yeah,
but the
yeah.
but
Yeah.
the main thing is that as you can tell, I've got the gray hair. I'm getting, I'm still a few years from retirement and stuff. But if I could tell you younger guys of doing anything is be sure and, go and listen to things that you may not necessarily, you know, think you're going to use or whatever, because
Right.
you never know when you're going to run into that chance. Like I said, we're just now using SQL hierarchy, and that was a 2008 feature.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
you just never know when you're going to pick up and need a feature, and you go, oh yeah, they had that.
Yep. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, following along with this, Mike does have a correction for me that is PSQL, where the P is from Postgres. And yeah, that's true. It is based off of PLSQL, but you're right. When they changed it around, they switched the name. But then Postgres can also let you use PLSQL and a few other languages. You can write Postgres functions and procedures in a half dozen languages, including C. Um,
I still
it's
say read Kevin's book and use Polybase to use T-SQL on all the different languages.
That works. I'm all right with that. So let's
That's cool.
see. Continuing to go through here, a lot of Lisp-like languages. There are a lot of Lisp-like languages. Um, that is true. That is about all I'm going to say on a SQL shop talk about Lisp. Mostly because I've never learned Lisp. I have a book on Lisp behind me, but I've never. Functional programming is the new shiny. Yes, I'm all about functional programming. And Mike doesn't like functional programming people, and that's okay. That's
Why?
So
Would he say why he doesn't like? Is it really that bad, or?
Oh, I might have misread me. Not the people. Okay. All right. I couldn't. The languages.
So,
Oh, the sheer number of languages drove him crazy. Okay, that's fair. There's a lot of languages.
well, and that's the thing is that there's so much out there that, it's amazing when you sometimes go to interview and you look at their job requirement and stuff, and they go, you need to have 10 years in Oracle and 15 years in SQL Server and 5 years in Postgres and whatever. And I'm like going, no one's got the mind capacity to know all those products.
Not
And
for
that's it.
75 grand a year.
Yeah.
That's usually the punchline. Like, we want you to know everything. Oh, we're gonna pay you 30 grand under market rate.
Right.
Okay, so good conversation going on in here. Now we are hierarchy ID. Solomon says he thinks it was a 2005 feature.
It is.
Yeah. Okay.
Was it 2005? I thought it was
Yeah.
2008.
No.
Yeah. The
One of those back there. It was way back there.
the recesses of time.
Yeah, it was at least 10 years ago. So, if not more.
No, I just want to give a shout out to Louis Davidson. To his book on relational database design has a really big chapter on hierarchy ID. So, yeah,
Cool.
worth reading.
Yeah. Oh, that book is
Yeah.
definitely worth reading. It's got one of the better explanations of normalization.
Yes.
Not the absolute best, but it is actually probably the best explanation of fourth normal form that I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Who cares about normal form? Just write it anyway, right? It'll work. It'll perform. I'm joking, of course. You know
he's
that.
hurting me. Oh, that went right into my.
Unless you're writing the database for SSRS, and then you just flatten it like crazy.
Why, Mala? Why did we let Tom on this again? So Lewis's book is, I think the version I have was the 2008 edition.
The latest one, yeah.
Yeah, Pro SQL Server Relational Database Design and Implementation. Let me drop a link in chat here. That's for the 2012 edition. And frankly, the 2008 edition would work just fine as well. I mean, you wouldn't get some of the syntax wouldn't be in there. That's new stuff that was introduced as of 2012 or 2016. But the concepts are still quite relevant. And the relational database design book that I love. This was actually a recommendation from Grant Fritchie.
Which book are you talking about, Kevin?
Here we go. Handbook of Relational Database Design by Candace Fleming and Barbara von Halle. So this book was from the 80s. The first half or so of the book is incredible. It is the best explanation of relational design. The second half of the book is how you would implement it in Oracle and a couple other systems back in the early 80s. So if you want like that historical lesson of how you would do it on a platform that's nearly 40 years old, okay. But for
interesting
anything modern, that second half of the book you can completely skip. Any physical implementation, just skip that part. But so I got my copy on Amazon used for like $2 or $3.
I'm looking. I might do the same. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't buy it new. Right now, it looks like the cheapest versions are maybe $6 or so, but you can probably find a copy cheaper if you go look around.
Right.
But that is, for my money, that is the best explanation of normalization and why normalization makes a lot of sense for relational design. Lewis has the second best.
Unless you go to microservices, right? Where they want you to do everything crazily.
Oh, you can still absolutely normalize microservices. That's just developers trying to pull the wool over your eyes.
Well, CJ did. So I don't know what he has to say that is new, but it's supposed to be, there's a new one out in the market. I
Yeah,
think
that's right.
sometime this month.
CJ Date does have a new book out on relational design. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I thought it was like relational handbook or something. Maybe it's the guide to standard SQL. No, that's not it. But he's got a new book. It's pretty recent.
What does he have to
Database-
say that's new? Any idea? I'd like to hear that before I buy it.
K. Klein. Date's book is about settling old scores with all the guys he used to argue with all the time. All right. Well, look, in the academic world, you got to have a hobby. That's all academic books are about. Huge section on nulls. Yeah, null. Yeah, that's a pain point.
Nulls are a pain point.
So a necessary pain point, except when they aren't. I think that's how I would sum that up. They're necessary until they're not, or something.
Or something.
Or you get into all the different date time features that you have, so you can get into that. That'll be a lot of fun too.
Yeah. And so actually going back to the earlier conversation about variants of SQL, how each one handles dates and times tends to be quite a bit different. The Oracle, I never liked the Oracle method for converting things to date time. It always felt too rigid. The Postgres method, where you basically like type in a string that represents something and let the database engine figure it out, is pretty nice, because they'll have things like intervals, and SQL Server doesn't do intervals the way that I want them to. Where you could say date minus 2 weeks and get the appropriate date, but the T-SQL method is having a lot of functions. Some of those functions are ANSI standard. Some of those functions are Microsoft T-SQL specific.
Correct.
Fair enough.
And some of those functions I just can't remember off the top of my head. I mean, the various date times from parts. You've probably about 3 dozen or so date related functions.
Right.
And I can tell you basically that if you're going to go and encrypt the birth date, don't do it if you've got to use any of these functions, because you're out of the water.
Yeah, you'd have to decrypt the date first.
Even there, it really doesn't even pretty much allow you to do it. If you decrypt it, encrypted, you're not doing the decrypting. The .NET
True.
layer is.
True,
So,
that's true.
so you're stuck. You can't do anything with it.
Oh, but what we can do is we can have the .NET layer decrypt it and then send it back in as a table valued parameter, decrypted to SQL Server.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Fair enough.
We'll see
That's
how that
smart.
works. We'll see how that works for you. Yeah.
That's a problem. That's a problem solved
Yeah.
by creating 3 new ones.
Or you just go to Enclave, and maybe Enclave will allow you to do it.
That's possible. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Actually,
I know
we're going that
Enclave
way,
is
so-
I know Enclave is supposed to be adding a bunch of stuff over time, and I know they've got ranges, but I haven't heard whether they've expanded past that yet or not.
Okay. Yeah, I have not been paying close attention, so that's a good question. So Lisanki says decrypt or decode a date. Sorry, are you talking security? Yes, we are talking security, specifically a feature in SQL Server called Always Encrypted, where Tom is an expert on Always Encrypted, by the way.
Yeah, I will tell you, do not encrypt your date with Always Encrypted if you want to do anything with it.
Right. Yeah, the gist of it is that Here we can encrypt the data such that not even the database administrator can see what the data is. The only people or things who could see what the data is are the basically whoever has the key for decryption, and usually you'll drop that certificate on an app server so that it can decrypt through your application, specifically through a .NET application.
Or SSIS, you can do it there, or SSRS, or
Yeah.
SSAS. So yeah.
Yeah. But it's going to limit what you can do. By the way, there was a question earlier that I had skipped over from Neil. How is Data Architecture Day coming along? It is great. I have a promo on this. It's coming up Saturday, May 16th. All-day marathon. Our call for speakers will end on Wednesday. So you have until Wednesday to get sessions in for Data Architecture Day. And after which point, we're going to put together our marathon. So that's how it's going. It's going great. I'm looking at that and saying, okay, enough sessions that it's going to be really enjoyable. Not so many that, I can still go to sleep that night.
It's interesting to me, Kevin, that, with this virus and all of us locked in and stuff like that, there's been a lot more online free training that, people can pick up. In fact, so much that, I'm like going, I can't go attend all of it. So, even Ozar, today sent out an email of, here's a bunch of free training stuff, developer days, I think is coming up this weekend or sometime.
Yeah, there is quite a bit. There's actually on the 29th, there is another
There's
conference.
the one that Matt Gordon and us is putting up. That's
Stuart
an event. Data platform day, and there's one that Andrew and Mark from our side are doing. So those are two at least that I
Yes.
want to. Yeah.
So the main thing I would say to our listeners out there is that there's a lot of free training right now out there that, you can pick up a lot of things while we're, if you don't have a whole lot to do because you're at home. I don't have that problem. I got way more work that I can do right now still.
Yeah.
That is true. Also, if you scroll down just a little bit on here, you'll see our link to our YouTube channel, where we've got a playlist of all of the different TriPass meetings that have been recorded over the past nearly a year. So that way you can watch as video quality slowly increases, and then it drops off a cliff, and then it slowly increases again.
So
some of those presentations are really good. I rewatch them now and then when I'm out of things.
So we've actually been recording for a year, Kevin, already?
Yeah,
I always learn.
First session I think was one that I did in May or June of 2019.
Oh wow. Okay.
Been doing things. Neil is doing 2 to 3 online events or conferences per week right now, delivering sessions. Yeah, the all of the people who normally would be giving sessions are like, being in the house is great, but now I'm bored. I gotta go do something.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure, yeah. That's an understatement. Yeah.
Okay, so we are just at time, which means we're going to wrap up for this edition of Shop Talk. Catch us again next Monday, 7 p.m. In the meantime, tomorrow, we're going to have Brad Gordon talking to us about Python, specifically about PySpark. So Databricks and PySpark. Check that out, meetup.com/TriPass. And while you're there, don't forget about Data Architecture Day. I can't show this promo too many times. It's impossible. I need to show it as many times as possible. My producer says that I need to show it as many times as I can. So check that out. You can watch it. You can sign up for the call for speakers. You'll get the link there, or I've dropped it into chat as well. And in the meantime, everybody, have a great evening. See you. Hopefully, see you again soon.
Next week.
Have a good night. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.